Wholeness, welcome. This is Josh, integrating presence and inner skilled. And today I've got Neil Gaur with me. Neil, what's happening?
Josh, good to be here with you, brother.
Likewise. So, the standard question I usually ask, who's Neil Gaur? What kind of work does he do?
So, my story goes, I guess, is the reason why I got into this work, and I guess I'm here, start from that moment, is because I was on the search of the root of all religion. That's kind of what really started me out. But then the journey that took me to that point was the fact that, I was born in England to an Indian family, and so I was raised Hindu. I was told to do all these rites and rituals. I followed everything that was shared with me. But when I look back at it in retrospect, the whole component of what was the end result, why did we do the rites and rituals, never really clicked. God was not a part of religion for me. And it seems like that in a lot of ways for first generation out of Indian children, that religion gets diluted more and more. And I think maybe the logical component gets in because Hinduism, for the most part, is based on a lot of blind faith, even though it's interesting because there's so much truth within that religion. And so, because I was raised Hindu, did all the rites and rituals, we also celebrated Christmas every year. I was also told about Jesus. I watched The King of Kings every year. I watched Moses. I watched Ben-Hur, all those things. Um, when I was curious about why am I watching all this stuff, my mom told me that our religion says that different people around the world have different prophets because we need to be approached differently culturally, different generations, locations, upbringings, so different prophets come about. So instead of being told that this was the only way, I was told why there is so much diversity in religion. And as I was growing older, I moved from England when I was 12 years old, and still celebrated Christmas and all that. But then when 17, 18 came, I started wondering, saying it's interesting how it's okay for me to be open to all these religions. However, the Abrahamic religions in which all this information comes from, each one of them, even though they're all connected to each other, say that this is the only way. Right? The Jews believe that Judaism is the only way, and they're waiting for the prophet. The Christians believe that Jesus, Yeshua, is the only one, Muhammad and Allah, and so forth. So why is it that it's okay for me to believe in them, but it's not okay for them to even believe that my history is valid? And not only that, because Indians civilization or Hinduism has so many gods, technically we're devil worshippers. And I started even hearing the whole thing about meditation being an opening to devils coming in your body and the fundamental Christian view of it all. So I started wondering why is it okay for me to be into this? And as I was doing that, I started researching and looking into the story of Jesus, and I quickly started seeing all these similarities between Krishna and Christ. And there's a reason why they both have Christ in the beginning of their name. Christ means the anointed one. Krishna means the anointed one. Christ comes from the word from the Greeks, from ancient Greeks called Christos, which also means the anointed one, right? And then the list just goes on. You can do a parallel explanation of Christ's life, Krishna's life, including born to a virgin mother, including the way he was killed with a spear in the side on the cross, and so much more. So I said, whoa, this is very interesting. Could it be that Yeshua, Christ, is actually a retold story from India and that there is some sort of connection here? So when I first started getting into this awareness in 2000, 2001, the first thing was I was like, Jesus never existed. I've come full circle now. I believe he did exist, but I was seeing that the ancient connection, and all of a sudden there was some sort of glimpse that there is a root. If these two are supposedly different faiths, Hinduism and Christianity, that I even went to Catholic school for 1 year in England. Like it was drilled into me that polytheistic religions and monotheistic religions have no connection, right? And I'm seeing it right here. So I started going down looking for the root of all religion, and then I was at Panera Bread, 2001, 2002, Bhagavad Gita with me, the Quran with me, the Old Testament with me, and I would be highlighting similarities. And as I was doing that, I kept going further and further back until I finally stumbled upon the Sumerian tablets of creation. And the I found a video online of Jordan Maxwell, and he was talking about the sons of God. And that's what really brought me into the Sumerian scriptures. And I was like, aha, I've now found some source texts from a lot of religions in the world. The great thing about finding the Sumerian scriptures was it was an introduction to the three main fields of Portal to Ascension, which is extraterrestrials being our gods, right? Quantum physics, because there's metaphors within the Sumerian scriptures that speak about advanced quantum physics science, and ancient history, what our true world history is. I started looking at it and seeing that a lot of the information in here is verbatim taken from scriptures around the world. And the first thing I found was the Epic of Gilgamesh. And the Epic of Gilgamesh is this hybridized being, half human, half ET, that was going around the world after a great flood. And when he goes around the world, he stumbles upon a guy called Upnapishtim. Upnapishtim is AKA Noah. So I'm like, whoa, wait a second. There's this story talking about a hybridized being from Earth and the stars that meets Noah, and it's the original Noah story. But wait a second, wasn't Noah supposed to be the only family left on the planet after the Great Flood? Are you telling me the original story had other hominids on Earth that weren't Homo sapien sapien? Right? So that started all with the Krishna thing, and then the next thing was really looking and seeing the flood story. And I looked around the whole world at that point because I was looking at all these ancient scriptures and realized there was a flood story in almost every ancient civilization. And I started wondering, was there collective trauma that we all experienced from a flood? And could we have fragmented from that point with different cultures and religions and forgot our common ancestry? So as that was the beginning foundation, that's 2002 or so, I just began going deep down the rabbit hole, exploring all those routes. And I went first, the route I went deep into was the extraterrestrial component, trying to see if some of these beings that we're talking about in our scriptures were actually visitors from the stars.
Well, right on. Yeah, and there's plenty here to just start off with. And I think the Christ story is paralleled even in more different is it like in Mithraism, or I
Yeah.
forget exactly where, but there's way more parallels than what you even mentioned,
Oh,
you know.
100%. Even
Oh
Osiris.
yeah, there yeah, exactly. And the I think it's really interesting how Hinduism even appropriates the Buddha, right? Oh, that's just Vishnu, and yeah, which is really interesting. They place it all in there. So you're approaching all this from a scholarly perspective. Do you? What about firsthand experience, contact, things like this? Do you work this into your worldview? And I think that's. I guess. Yeah, let's start there.
Yeah. So when I first started getting into all this,
Mm,
I wasn't having contact or aware of like
mm,
any actual interactions. Now, in retrospect, I realize I've been in communication with some sort of beings and entities and whatever the whole time. I've been guided this in this direction.
mm.
But when I got into the Sumerian scriptures and saw the EC component, I immediately went into the channeling. So at 2004 or so, 2005, I was learning a lot from different channels from beings bringing down this information, and I was utilizing this information to just back up the fact that um, not only is has Earth been visited a lot, but it's also one of the biggest light shows in the universe at this point. And the reason why is my personal belief is that Earth is for lack of a better explanation, the Library of Alexandria for DNA, for genetics. And beings throughout the cosmos, throughout our galaxy, if not every being throughout our galaxy, has donated DNA to the Earth experience. From beings that look like cockroaches, to beings that look like ants, to beings that look like mantises, to beings that look like dragonflies, that are sentient, that have donated to this experiment on Earth. And I would say the Sumerian scriptures definitely was the intro where I started looking at the genetic hybridization stories from that. And when I was looking at the ancient texts, the thing that really took me into more of we've been seeded was I quickly found that a lot of ancient civilizations spoke about stories of clay, right? And if you look up, and now you have ChatGPT, you can go on there and type in every ancient civilization that spoke about humans from clay and give me the stories. If you look at that, you'll see that it's literally a metaphoric and artistic expression of genetic hybridization, right? And it's a lot of cultures from India to Egypt are all speaking about these beings came and they molded humanity out of their own image in from this clay. And so now I'm at understanding that we have a lot of these beings have donated DNA, and in a way, they've donated DNA to a descended version of themselves. And in our linear timeline, we are progressing to become an ascended version of them. And it's almost like we're trying to work out maybe some sort of galactic speciesism by trying to figure out how we can all live in harmony here. So that's kind of my, in a nutshell, worldview. But when it comes to contact, I'm I was the first ET race I ever knew existed was the Arcturians. And I've really been into technology my whole life, into computers. I even used technology and was I would say one of the first few people really doing big webinars over a decade ago on this content. And I realized that Arcturians, they have this deep connection to technology, one of the most technologically advanced civilizations in our galaxy. So that was my first connection to them. But as time progressed, I started realizing that Earth is a gift, meaning that a lot of us have achieved the greatest of heights throughout the cosmos. We've been many things, we have been so much. And Earth is a gift to those that have achieved those great heights. And a lot of us have been, maybe I've been in the Pleiades more times than I've been in Arcturus, but I might claim heritage to Arcturus on Earth. And the reason for that is the theme of my lessons and my experiences in Arcturus are more relevant to my purpose now. It doesn't mean that's what I am, only because I've been it all, but I'm pulling in certain threads of it, right? So that's kind of how everything morphed. And I'll give one more thing here. Then in 2006, so I would say this part was the moment of like real downloads from some sort of beings. In 2006, I created an online group called 2012 Consciousness, Mind, Evolution, and Presence. And it was a group that was learning all this stuff. I was deep into conspiracies at that point. I was like all about the Illuminati out to get us and all this stuff. And so I created this online group to see who would join and learn more information about 2012 and consciousness. They became very, very big. So big that I had to create a California chapter, a New York chapter, California. I created all these separate chapters. And from 2006 to 2008 was probably the most spiritually awakening time for me. Because before that, I was into ancient history and ETs and channeling, but I was intellectualizing everything. There was no actual implementation. And so in 2008, I was working as a financial advisor for a broker, and the market crashed in 2008. So because it crashed, I got fired, and then I was wondering like what should I do, now? And I didn't want to go back to a regular job. So I I was at an open mic, first time I ever performed poetry, spoken word, sitting in the audience, and this guy is on stage, my friend, and he's singing this song called My Name is Love. And in that moment, I remember it like I was in the back and I had this realization that I'd been into all this stuff, but there was one missing link, and it was love. And what I mean by that is, before that moment, I was judging ignorance. I was judging evil. I was judging what I considered bad and all this stuff. And I realized how the darkness and the evil work for each other, and how the polarity is the sacred dance of experience. And I stopped judging that, and I realized even those that I considered that had taken us out or doing all these things trying to depopulate are playing their role perfectly for what I decided to come for. And a few days later, I was sleeping and I had a download come to me to change the name of my group to Portal to Ascension. And I changed the name of the group, but in that moment, this is the download. I had a 20-year package in one moment, and it was from 2008 to 2028, pretty much m- mapping out Portal to Ascension and what I was going to do. And I've been on that trajectory ever since, and I still have an end goal. Well, there's no end goal; it continues, but I still have like the first chapter of this. I still know what the 2028 vision is, and I've been working towards that.
Well, that's really cool. That's really important. What was it? Something like Don Juan said or something, and the Carlos Castaneda material, which we know has all of its issues too. It's just like if does the path have a heart?
Mm,
It's one of the first things we have to act. Does it have a heart? And it is really super important. And I find maybe early on that what's considered judgmentalism, it's like the precursor to just kind of discernment. It's
yeah,
until we can
I
we
love
just
that.
need to discern. Okay, this is just not for me. It's not that I look down on it or judgmental towards it. It's just a recognition. Oh, yeah, that's them, and I see and honor that, but that's just not for me, right? And yeah. their own path. And so I'm guessing this was because of your upbringing, that you were into this stuff really early on, and you just started kind of asking questions for yourself,
Yeah,
and looking into to other ways, like you're saying. And so the other thing here, I think, is the biggie is the genetics, right? This is huge. I mean, even in just the base program, everyday life, we see all this genetically modified food and CRISPR and things like this. But that's kind of maybe the human parallel of it, I guess.
yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know how much that's really influenced by other things. But it does seem to be a genetic hotspot here, a genetic library, as you say. Or, why I've heard some people talk, like saying that, this notion of a financial system is kind of pointless to some of these races and how far advanced they are, but some of them still trade in genetics. And, my question is, I guess, why are they doing this? When I look at some of these, reason, or maybe it's not subject to reason, that a lot of them are fear death and extinction. They don't want to become extinct. So some of these races will do anything they can to kick the can down the road, to prolong their life, to harvest energy, to make genetic modifications, to hybridize races to be able to incarnate somewhere, and also I was wondering if you're familiar with this notion of, and I haven't heard of this since except for Randy's work, I think. See if I'm even getting it right. That a lot of this vast diversity of genetics here, that's like a 3D representation. So we think of like the insectoid species. They'll have like a physical anchor here, in an insect that we see in the 3D, but that's their anchor point here to like 4D or whatever these beings are. So they need to have a physical analog here to be able to be anchored to come in and out of this reality. I don't know if I'm representing that idea
yeah,
right or not, but
yeah.
yeah,
So
some
I
things like this.
definitely.
Yeah.
So there's two types of, in my opinion, there's two types of genetic connection. There's soul genetics,
Yeah.
and then there's physical third dimensional genetics. And the third dimensional genetics aren't actually just third dimensional because there are more strands, but the strands aren't, you know how they say it's metaphysical strands, invisible strands. It's not that. They just vibrate at a light spectrum that we aren't be able to perceive with our current eyes. So they actually exist physically, but they're just at the light spectrum outside of a physical, like any other type of frequency and lasers that can do things that we can't see. And so there is the soul genetics that are separate but also connected to the physical genetics. And by having a specific amount of physical genetics connected to a specific ET race, it makes it easier for that soul to incarnate into that race. I don't know the percentage, but I know when the reptilians came here, the ones that came through the Orion Stargate, they couldn't incarnate onto Earth until a specific amount of reptilian beings from this physical reality had come to Earth enough times to alter the DNA so that there was a perfect percentage for them to come into specific lineages, right? Now the understanding with Dolores Cannon's work is that law was thrown out after 1945, after the nuclear tests, and before that it still might be easier, but now souls are, it's an easier process for souls now to jump into bodies where they don't have a specific genetic connection to ultimate, like on that percentage level. But for quite a while, including specific ethnic groups on Earth, were pulling in souls for specific star systems that connected to the genetics, including their written language connected to those beings as well. I'll give you an example. The Jewish, not the Zionist ones, but the original bloodline, right, was connected to the Arcturians, where Arcturian beings were incarnating into the Jewish bloodline for quite some time from the Abrahamic lineages, and including their language, Hebrew, was connected to the Arcturians as well. So, yeah, it's really very interesting. But the biggest commodity in the universe is genetics, and the reason why is when we came here, right? If you go back to the Big Bang or before everything, the void, When the void became duality, the void was unconditional. Source, the blackness, the darkness, whatever it was unconditional, meaning it did not inflict its own intention and agenda on everything. It just wanted to experience itself infinitely, right? But part of the experience of itself infinitely was to allow its creation to have its own free will to put their own intentions on creation. Does that make sense? So, yeah, go ahead.
Yes, and I've heard that before, of course. Yeah. Um, if you had a follow up, follow up there, but I wouldn't ask you. So, can you expand more on you said, well, if there's a certain percentage of a certain type of genetics, then they can incarnate. But now you said that's been thrown out the window. Could you say more about that and how it works now?
Yeah,
Then,
yeah.
um,
So, I gotta give a disclaimer first. There's so much going on. No one knows every answer. There's so many ETs and intentions and agendas. Case in point is that I've heard of these dragonfly beings that are on Earth, and they're not even messing with humans. They're literally trying to save a dragonfly species from going extinct because they're their ancestors. You know what I'm saying? So it's this. There's so much happening here, right? So now, what happened before World War II or during World War II? Was that we started doing nuclear testing, nuclear bombs. There's a reason why, if you look up maybe the top 100 sightings in the world, if you look that up, almost every one of them is at a nuclear facility. Because what happens is this reality is much more of a simulation than we probably even believe. That you and I were not made out of solid matter; we're made out of frequencies and vibrations, almost like a really advanced code. You can consider it like a hard drive, um, with all these different with games and softwares in there that are playing out, and these softwares are different levels of the game, different dimensions, different experiences of the construct. Now imagine if somebody goes in the hard drive and they just light up a little light flame in that hard drive in that one component. What happens? Well, the rest of the software gets corrupted and some of it doesn't work. The matrix starts crumbling, but also what's outside that hard drive could also be affected by it. So that's what's happening with nuclear bombs. Is when you explode nuclear energy, it splits the atom. And where does the energy go? It goes into the singularity of the quantum field because atoms are not created by solid matter. Atoms are created by subatomic particles. Subatomic particles are in the quantum realm that are all made out of infinite singularities. What's a singularity? Well, it's a mini black hole, a mini wormhole. It's where all creation is projected out of. It's almost like the projector screen for the hologram. So when you split the atom and you go into the quantum world, the energy goes into that and it starts corrupting the code around it and affecting other realities and dimensions. And so when that happened, a call went out into the universe, and the call basically said that, hey, they've got to a level where they're able to affect other realities now, not just harm themselves, but harm others. And there's a potential they could harm themselves and wipe themselves out, and we cannot let the Earth experiment die. It's got to continue. So the call was, okay, we need beings to incarnate on Earth because we need to make a change without violating the Prime Directive from Star Trek, which is the law of non-interference. So we can't interfere with them because they're not at the consciousness level to go and down there and talk to them. They're going to fight us and all this stuff. So the only way to do it is to go and incarnate into these souls on into these bodies on Earth, be born as a child, go through the process of amnesia, try to remember who we are, and change things. So the reason why that law was shifted in some way of the genetic bloodline connection was that the floodgates had opened for incarnation on Earth. And since the floodgates opened, beings began incarnating in all types of races, religions, creeds, and all this stuff in order to basically have the impact that we're creating now.
thanks for that. I haven't heard that. Yeah. So where does that? I guess there's just so much to talk about here, right? Where does that leave the hybrid programs then?
Yeah. So the hybrid programs, I mean, they're related and they're separate at the same time because there's different variations of hybrid programs. There's ones connected to the government with specific ET races that they are in contract with. There's other beings that are here right now that no one even knows about that are existing etherically on other realms of the light spectrum that are extracting DNA from us in order to take back to their planets to do different things. Hybridization is the name of the game ever since creation began. When and I would say this, let's go back far into the first ever human template in our galaxy. Before the humans came into our galaxy, there was predominantly reptilian races in our galaxy. Not and again, reptilians aren't all negative; they aren't all positive. Even though the amount of negative ones are very, very small, it's a very small percentage compared to the positive ones. But the positive ones, you can't even consider them positive; they're more neutral. They're just doing their own thing, you know. And so this was an insectoid and a reptilian galaxy, including dragon races, which are some really beautiful races of dragons. And when the humans, in a lot of the ways that it had worked before with genetics, was that the reptilians, they would incarnate into their own genetic group on the same planet over and over. They would recycle the soul. The grandfather would become the son, you know, would become its grandchild. But when the humans came in through Lyra, they were the master geneticists. These guys were all about genetic hybridization. Sure, other beings could have existed in this grand scheme of the entire Milky Way galaxy that did stuff like this. I don't know. But when they came in, they decided to, after incarnating to Lyra, to start hybridizing themselves throughout the galaxy, starting with 3 planets within Lyra. And then they started venturing out in different millennia, different tribes venturing out, going around the galaxy, finding native populations on planets and hybridizing themselves. And then you keep having that for eons and eons and eons, and now you get to the story of Earth, where you have the story of the Lyrans, the Pleiadians, and the Arcturians hybridizing on Earth. You have the story of the Anunnaki, which is the most famous one, hybridizing on Earth. So the hybridization thing has happened forever. Now, on Earth in this moment, there's regular neutral hybridization programs where races are being created utilizing our genetics because we are a petri dish of information, right? There's so much variation on Earth. This variation doesn't exist in the galaxy on this level. It's the perfect place to go and pick something and do something or create something from it. And what happens is when beings become sentient, right? The original spark of source, you can't even judge them because the original spark of source awakens in them. And what was the original spark of source? I want to create something in my image, the creator being. Let me create in my image. So every being that becomes sentient just has this urge to create. Look at humans, how much we create, even life. So they go around, it's almost like an addiction, creating on that level. So there's those beings, and now then there is ones connected to the government that maybe have some nefarious agendas in mind. But even on those, the jury is out because you look at some of those stories that have been given from whistleblowers and experiencers, and the stories that they give is that these beings are trying to, as you said, save themselves, or they they accidentally done a genetic hiccup within their own evolution where they're now not able to experience certain types of emotions and things, and they're trying to figure out how they can acquire it back, right? So yeah, so the answer to that is basically hybridization has been going on ever since the beginning, and it just continues in so many levels here on Earth.
It is pretty wild. I don't know the full scope of this. I'm just piecing it together like third hand, because my level of awareness is not where I can access this stuff directly.
Yep.
And so it's all, for me, kind of speculation and conjecture and conceptualization, unfortunately. But there is some kind of maybe sense here, beyond just the mainstream, but maybe not either. So I'm just wondering, what if there's some of these races that just keep making mistake after mistake? Well, I mean, I don't think you seem to be more of, along the path of this is kind of, not predetermined or fated, but,
There is
all
no,
happening for a purpose
yeah,
and a
exactly.
reason, right?
Hmm.
But what happens? So I guess where I have to approach this then is harm, and so while I might not know, exactly what another considers harm, I know what's considered harmful for me. But um,
Right.
so what I'm saying is, if some of these programs go on, and there's a kind of a consensus that certain things, let's just say this is all theoretical, hypothetical, and that something they're harming something, and then they've messed up, and they've even acknowledged that, and they want to keep doing this over and over again.
Yeah.
This time it will be different. This time we can fix it. So if that is the case, how? how long do we allow this for
Yeah.
without falling into giving it the excuse of eternalism, like falling into this extreme of eternalism where I find I mean, metaphysically here, I'll just explain why I think that's an extreme, because if it's eternalism, what if I want to get out? Okay, I can't. It goes on forever. Okay, but I don't want that. I want to get out of this cycle of rebirth.
Yeah.
I want to get off this wheel, but I can't because it's eternal. Too bad. So what I'm saying is, so a lot of times I feel that some beings will metaphysically or spiritually use this excuse of eternalism to say, oh, well, it goes on forever, so we can just try as many times as we want,
Yeah.
We'll eventually get it right. Do you know what I'm saying
Are you
here?
speaking about
So,
reincarnation in particular, or are you speaking about hybridization?
yeah, well, let's go into both, because I mean, if you can, if you'd like to address these things, like how many chances do we give them, and at what expense? Not that I'm just trying to,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, okay, with the hybridization thing, there almost is no way to stop it unless it comes out into the public and is commonly accepted that this is happening. You know, the only way to really stop it is maybe to have us to know your own sovereignty where you don't allow it to happen to you. But then most people don't even remember it's happening. Most people don't even know what's going on, and the people that do know are either traumatized or they're in the realm of it was a good experience. You know what I mean? So it's like, oh, I talked to these ETs. They did this on here, but I had a great experience. Or, oh my God, I remember this happening to me. I'm traumatized. I'm in a support group because support groups exist, and they even have a
it's so polarized,
yeah,
isn't it?
exactly.
Yeah.
There's even a comedy show based on that, right? People of Earth, right? Was based on the support group for the ET hybridization program, basically. And
Oh, I see.
yeah,
Yeah. Wow.
that show is basically
No,
about that. Yeah.
I haven't seen it. I have to check it out.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So long story short on that one, basically the whole show is about a support group of people that have been abducted and been hybridized, and they even have a reptilian, a Nordic, and a gray that are all homies on a spaceship in the sky, and they're all like it's really comical. And and I've been to support groups, and I know a lot of people that have been abducted, had these experiences, and some people, as I said, super traumatized. Many of them aren't even in the spiritual world, so they don't even have the tools on how to heal from it, and then other people are just like, yeah, communicate with ETs, and this is what they're trying to do. So the again, we don't really even know if it's even a bad thing of what's happening here and what's really being affected, because then there's people like Bashar and other beings that are being channeled that are saying that our soul came up with this agreement beforehand. So because we aren't all knowing, we don't know if they're just telling us that, right? Or if that's the case. So what only thing that could happen to shift that is us to evolve even more, so we get to a point where we know the truth, and or the all this stuff comes out in the open about it. And it's hopeful that it will come out in the open, because the last congressional hearing on UAPs in Congress, lo and behold, finally, because they said a lot of whistleblowers have said that you never, no matter what happens, the government is never allowed to, anybody in the government's never allowed to talk about hybrids. It's just a no talk zone. And one of the congressional members said, we've heard that there could be stories that people are being genetically hybridized using these black budget programs with, and I was mind blown, like in Congress in DC, you know?
Same. Yeah.
So it's getting on that level, yeah.
And it is good news, even though that we know the levels of deception here and how vast and deep it runs, and that there's certain factions that have it in their interest to just run it as another psyop, right?
Yeah,
And use it for their agendas and do limited hangouts or just psyop. However, it will sharpen our discernment. Hopefully, it will be
right.
it will force people to sharpen discernment. I feel so. I think that at the end of the day, this knowing what is true and what is not, what is in operation, what is not, and what the agendas are. How do we view it, and then how do we respond to it? What we really need to pay attention to, and how we need to pay attention
Right.
to it. And the other, this is. Yeah, this notion of disclosure it's really hopefully it's more and more at the forefront. It's just yeah, what's an intelligence op and what's not, and
Yep.
for what reason.
You know, an interesting thing as well, going back to Bashar, and I'm sure most people know who he is, but Daryl Anka, who channels Bashar. So there's six hybrid races from the Greys, and I forget all the names right now, but the every single one of them was an experiment, just like you said. How many times did they do it? So it was six different places, and six planets have been inhabited with these different hybrids, and they're all different experimentations towards it. And then they finally mastered it, supposedly, and they created a race called the Yael. And the Yael is a hybrid human, Earth, hybrid human and gray being. Even the Essassani, which is Bashar's civilization, is human gray, and which is one of the hybrid races. And so, what Bashar says, and other people have also said, is that the first race we're going to ever meet is the Yael, because they're the closely in ancestry to us, the closest in genetics to us, and they already have space travel. So they're going to come here on Earth, and we're going to meet them, and they're going to teach us space travel. So if his story is legit, that would be more of like a positive outlook on what's going on with the hybridization program.
It is, and have you? Does he include in that? I don't keep up with Bashar. That some people use a certain type of grays. Some beings will use that as their operators in here to keep their hands clean.
Yeah.
That way, they don't have to operate directly. He
So,
includes those
so
type of grays.
he spoke so much. And I've heard a lot of
Hmm.
it, but I haven't heard anything about that with him. I've
That.
just heard about the Greys doing that. But then there are like certain mantis beings that use Greys. I've heard that certain government factions that use Greys, and that could go into the fact that Grey is just a blanket term. It's not actually one race. There's many different Greys. There's different size Greys, and also then there's stories of the Greys from Lyra, which were basically humans that had to go underground and lost the ability to have to give birth. And then there's the Greys that are interdimensional that have been jumping universes. And one of the Greys, let me just say this: the one of the government whistleblowers says that this race of Greys said that, hey, we are you from the future. And this is going to happen to you guys if you don't change stuff on the future over here on Earth, which then allowed for the violation of a lot of people's free wills on Earth through abductions. But then another person says that that gray was from a parallel reality where that they lived in a completely different trajectory in their universe, and our trajectory might not even be anything similar to theirs. They're just using that in order to make the government basically agree to allow them to experiment on us, right? So
Yeah, it's so
it's very
wild.
confusing. There's
It,
so much
it,
going on.
Oh, it totally is. And, not to mention to muddy the waters further with the grays, that you have some that will come and cloak themselves as light beings, apparently,
Mm,
or they can use to appear as something they're not to begin with, but they're a gray behind that. And then not to mention the kind of more darker military my lab stuff I've heard of. Um, um, let's just say trauma-based mind control stuff where there's human people dressed up as grays when they're doing these kinds of operations and programming. I've heard too, so that's really messed up. To get people to think it's that in order to blame an alien species instead of when it's just all
yeah,
nefarious humans doing this. You know what I mean?
it's
So
societal,
it
man.
is.
I'll
Yeah,
give you
yeah, yeah.
another one.
It,
There's this
it's
good YouTube channel called Infographics Show. I don't know if you heard of it. And it's like a cartoon style thing where they do like things around the world. But they also do some interesting ones on government, CIA documents, things like that, reenactments with cartoons. And they reenacted a CIA declassified document of a guy that was a military guy that was in his room, and they sent in this arm probe, and it went through the room. It grabbed him, it took him out of the room, ripped him out of his window, and brought him into a lab. And the whole thing was a staged alien abduction, and it was a declassified document. And so,
now what
yeah,
was the arm in the physical, or are you
no, it's
talking
all
about in the
physical.
dream
It's all
world?
physical. It was,
Okay, but go ahead.
yeah, basically, it was like a claw. It was
Yeah,
some
but
sort of
like, is
technology.
it disembodied? Like, what was it? How did that thing operate?
It was a tech no, it was a technology, so it doesn't say where it came from, but I'm thinking like he's in a military base. This is happening in a
Oh,
military base while he was in his dormitory.
I see.
And so
Okay.
it took him um underground, and then basically they um I don't know if they were dressed up as Greys or they gave them screen memories, but it looked like a regular abduction experience. And this was a declassified document speaking about all the
And,
stuff that had happened in that moment.
and then there could be a counter op to make that look absurd to discredit those type of operations
Right.
too. Like, where does an arm come from? Does he remember how that arm took him to a certain facility? I
Yeah.
mean, did he float through the air? So there's just so many dirty tricks in this game too.
Right.
You know what I mean?
We already know as
Yeah.
well that something that definitely happened through J. Allen Hynek's information and also Richard Doty is that there were some advanced craft that was being worked on by the U.S. government or maybe other black budget governments in the world. And what they would do is they would prop up UFO stories in order to move it away from their technology to have people start thinking that it was UFOs, right? So that's one level of it. But the inception part is a lot of those craft were reverse engineered from actual UFOs.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah,
it's this layer upon layer upon layer, and then countering layers at every
right, right.
layer, and sublayer. So what do you think about this whole drone thing? What's your take on
Well,
that?
the one that was happening a few months ago.
Yeah, like the New Jersey drones
Yeah.
and the stuff still people see and whatnot.
Okay,
Yeah.
so a colleague and friend, JK Ultra, did the best breakdown on that, and she looked at all these documents showing that there was actually a drone program that was scheduled to launch by the U.S. government at that point, and then in those papers, it also showed the window of where the experimentations were going to be, and it was exactly in that exact window strip of where all those drones were, New Jersey, right?
Well,
However,
hang on. Where did she get this information from? Was it public or what?
yeah, it's
Because the
public.
FFA they first denied that they didn't know what it was. Then
Yeah.
they came out and said, "Oh, this is an FAA secret program." So they went back on their word,
It was public
right?
documentation. It was from some, I forget what it was, Navy or something. Whoever was the ones actually experimenting with it, they had basically done press releases on this on their website. And she pulled in all this stuff, and you could see it. She did like a TikTok video that's 4 minutes long where she shows all the documentation and everything. But it had been actually in the works for a few years about this drone program and the testing strip. It wasn't released in the newspaper, but it was part of their documentation and it wasn't classified information, right? So that was one component of it all. However, what we saw at that moment, it wasn't just New Jersey and that area wasn't the only drones. They were all over the world. There was a drone in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean following a British Navy ship. There was there were drones following Air Force pilots home. Okay, all at the same time. So I feel like it was a bit of everything. Reverse engineered craft, advanced drone program, UFOs, and maybe the drone testing was deliberately scheduled to be around the same time that they thought there would be all these sightings or when these sightings occurred, you know? So I don't I've looked at a lot of people. I don't think anybody has the exact answer, but from looking at some of the descriptions of what was happening, including these massive drones the size of an SUV having no sound at all, right? And then some of them look like there were orbs phasing in and out of reality. Some of them look like metal structures, right? So, I don't know who knows what the truth is, but it definitely was very, very confusing time, and I wish that we would get some good information about it, but I don't know. It's hard to know.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same thing. I've heard little bitty pieces here and there, but it doesn't sound like there's a definitive consensus
But
on this phenomena
even a drone
whatsoever.
following an Air Force general home, that in itself, if it's not some UFO ET thing, shouldn't it have been like put towards some sort of investigation? Because could it be terrorists? Or who could it be, right? Instead, when the Trump administration came out, they just said, "Oh, they were all ours. They were all test." You know?
Yeah, but I thought they also said that they didn't know what it was at some point. Then they said, yeah, it was a FAA experimentation. And then he said that. And then what? I don't think they didn't scramble any military jets towards them, right? Or try to shoot them down or
Yeah.
anything. So that's very interesting too.
Yeah, they well
Yeah.
when it was before the election, this happened, right? And then, but like they did nothing about it. They just said, "Oh, this is happening," blah blah blah. But if it was something to look into, you would be freaked out and looking into it. And then as soon as Trump went in, because he promised that he's going to look into it, the first press conference they had, they said, "We looked into it. We found out the information. They're ours." So if Biden knew that they were ours, Why wouldn't he have just said that? You know?
Yeah, there's probably a lot going on behind the scenes that we have no idea what's
Definitely.
going on, you know. Well, wow, we covered a lot of ground here. I think we probably ought to wrap it up now. I mean, of course, there's so much more we could go into. Tons and tons. Is your knowledge base and experience base on this is really deep, and I appreciate
Thank you.
all the time and work you've done on this, and not to mention, you know, your website portals to Ascension and all the stuff you have going on there. Wow, I don't I don't know how you do it. There's just so much. So tell people a little bit about that and anything else you want to tell people
Sure.
about.
Yeah, so portal2sentient.org is my website. You can go there, sign up. You get free access to a lot of content. But I started in 2008 doing small events around the world, around the US, I mean, and sound healing events. But that evolved for 8 years until 2016, where I started doing online webinars on conferences, moved everything from live in person to online. And now we have over 10,000 hours of content. We do around 70 events a year, conferences, webinars, tours, retreats. We did our first 7-day cruise last year. We do 3 conferences a year, one in Glastonbury, England, one in San Diego, and then another one that travels to a different country every year, plus our online content. And even this might have the event might have happened before this is out, but on June 14th, we have a Saturn and Elohim conference, a whole 9-hour event just on evidence and truth about Saturn and its connection to the moon and the matrix and who the Elohim are. So I've had the opportunity to do is any piece of information I want to go deep into, we expand it into 1-2 day events or do a workshop with that speaker and really have become a one-stop shop for consciousness. So for people that are waking up right now, that want to go somewhere where they can have something curated in a way that helps get them to those levels of understanding and awareness, or to those people that are the teachers for the new paradigm that want to further their knowledge, we have it all there. And it's just been an honor really to be able to do this, and I love the fact that I can do this full time because it's the most interesting story ever told. Who are we? How do we get
What else is
here?
there? Yeah.
Yeah,
Seriously, what could be more important than questions like that, you know?
right.
So, well, Neil, thanks so much again for joining.
Pleasure.
And yeah, I could implore people to check it out, especially any interested in anything we're talking about. There's just so much material that you said 10,000 hours. Wow,
Hmm.
amazing. All right, with that, may all beings everywhere realize awakening and be free. Bye now.